the townships around a lot of the bat caves, and what they've seen is that it's about a 3% prevalence. So when you hear us talk about prevalence, that means that it's about 3% of the population has been exposed to it or had it. And most of them get a cold. Most of them may not even have any symptoms. If you look at a lot of these basketball players that, what's the guy from Utah Jazz that had it? He was talking about he tested positive, but he had literally no symptoms. He had none. Most people are going to get that, but I try and stay in my scope of research, and I don't deal with the treatment portion. I deal with, as you said earlier, the whole mammal portion and how it moved from animals to humans. In bats, coronaviruses are not in the respiratory system; they're in their intestinal system. And so what happens is when you are around an animal that has some of these coronaviruses and they defecate, this is how they also spread the viruses into the air here and on other substances and surfaces, rather. And what happens is I've actually been to a few wet markets in China, and the thing about it is when you're in there, it's kind of a free fall. I don't know how many of your listeners or you have ever looked at it, but if you were to take a farmer's market and instead of having just mainly vegetables or other goods, you put live animals in there. And people are butchering them there. And, of course, when you butcher an animal, you open up, you are exposing the surfaces, you're exposing the air. And so you have a lot of people that just come in contact with it. Now, the thing about it is that coming in contact with it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become sick. This is why they are stressing now the whole washing of the hands, not touching eyes or your mouth, and anywhere that the virus can enter into your body. And so people are traveling more than ever. And so the thing about this virus, and I got to say this, and I hesitate to say this, but in our circles, this is what we're really talking about is, as a biologist, this is one hell of a virus. Not in terms of being able to be defeated is new, but the incubation period, up to 2 weeks. Now, the things that we've seen that go up to 2 weeks of an incubation period are smallpox, chickenpox, mumps, measles, and these are things that spread around the whole world as well. These were also pandemics until we developed vaccines for them. And so the dare I say, beauty of this virus is that it can lay in your body and make copies of itself. The way viruses work is they get into your body, they have genetic information. They inject their genetic information into your cells, and your cells begin to make copies of that genetic material. So in this 14-day period, your body is replicating the virus within itself. Then from there, your immune system also, when it finally recognizes, hey, I have a foreign object, I need to do something about it, you now have cells that are being destroyed because of the virus, and then your body's immune system kicks in, starts to try and destroy those cells. And so this is why that the pneumonia is kicking in so well. And pneumonia is just fluid on your lungs, right? And so you have the fluid that's caused from the virus breaking down cells in your body and it running into your lungs, because it starts in the upper respiratory tract, then it moves to the lower respiratory tract. And by the time your body recognizes it needs to fight it, it's trying to destroy all of that. So this is why people move very rapidly through those symptoms, man. And it's interesting. And from my standpoint, just seeing a pandemic form, and I've talked to a few different people, and I was talking to about 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a young lady that went to college with me, and she was like, oh, well, we don't have any in Mississippi. And I said, yes, you do. They'll be talked about by the end of the week. and lo and behold, 2 days later it was there. I think what people don't understand is that viruses' job, their whole purpose is for them to spread. And the better ones, if you notice, I named smallpox, chickenpox, mumps, measles. Those are the ones that lay dormant in your body, the incubation period, rather. Now, other ones that we usually fight off, like the flu, it has a 1 to 2 day incubation period. The common cold has 1 to 3 day incubation period. Bronchitis, 3 to 5. And these are things that our bodies usually can fight off and deal with. But those other things, man, they're something.
Well, and from a scientific standpoint, because I know a lot of people, even here in Durham and around the North Carolina area, have had what they thought was the symptoms. They thought that they had the symptoms. They might, testing is at a premium these days, and a lot of people are not getting tested. But when they've heard these symptoms, the ones that you just mentioned, and they reflected back on the way they felt, whether they felt as miserable as some of the athletes have said that they felt, or some of the other things that they have seen people that have been tested and had it have expressed that was the symptoms that they have felt that they had it. And one, is it possible for you to have it and fight it off yourself? Because I do know that we've got people that are self-quarantining and trying to, I guess, fight it off themselves. And two, if you've got it that way, when the test comes out, will there be a way that you will know whether they had it when they thought they had it? Because like I said, these people have not had any tests. And is it possible for it to come back? Because I do know that there are certain diseases that once you get it, you're pretty much done with it. But then there are others that can make a return trip. So those are my questions that come to my mind off the top of my head. Is one, can you fight it off yourself and by some of these self-quarantine methods that we're seeing with these stay-at-home orders and things of that nature? And two, if you've had it and were never tested to have it, will we find out that you had it later? And also, what I asked earlier, can it come back?
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's get into it. Foremost, yes, you can go back and test kind of retroactively to see if you had it, because your body will have antigens in it. And if you have the antigens, depending on the level of the prevalence of the antigens in your bloodstream, you can tell how long ago you had it. But to get to that, let me say this. A lot of people are talking about, this is a different strand of coronavirus. This isn't a different strand, because what we found out already is that just this SARS-CoV-2, this coronavirus COVID-19, it has 8 different strands already. Now, so let me break that down, because to understand the answer to your questions, you have to understand when we're talking about strands versus a virus. So we're talking about coronaviruses, and there are hundreds of types of coronaviruses out there, by the way. But if you were to look at that like it was a car, so coronavirus would be the car, SARS-CoV-2 or this COVID-19 would be a specific maker. Let's say it's Benz, since it's one of the best ones out here. It's a Mercedes-Benz, right? But then the different 8 strands would be a E-class or a C-class. All of them are Mercedes, but, they're a little different, right? So that would be the kind of the strand. Or if you want to look at it, I think one of the other things I use for a mammalogy class here when we're talking about different strands, you looked at dogs. So if you looked at coronaviruses, it was a dog. And you have all these different types of domestic dogs, right? And then let's say you have a lab. Well, your SARS virus, while it is a dog, which is equivalent to like being a coronavirus, you have a specific breed of dog. And that's what this SARS is. And that would be, let's say, a lab, okay? But you have different types of labs, right? You got a black lab, you got yellow labs, you got chocolate labs. Those would be your different strains. Now, the reason I'm talking about that is what is being looked at right now is that different strands may affect people in very different ways. They're all going to have the SARS kind of fingerprint on them, the acute respiratory syndrome portion, but some may be more more aggressive than others. And again, you're also talking about what were the pre-existing conditions of the individuals who came in contact with the virus. But some of the different strands might be a little bit more aggressive than the others. So this is why I kind of, as I said, I had to go into explaining making sure everybody understands this whole thing with the different strands. But I think what's going to happen is you got those that are quarantined, you got those that are isolated. Quarantine is when you may have come in contact with it and we want to keep you separated from the general population. Once you've been seen to have the virus, you go to isolation. That's when you can't be around anybody, and people are limited in terms of how they interact with you, medical professionals, and that. So you have isolation versus quarantine. And so right now, the general quarantine that the public is under, that is to kind of stop it, because I do the modeling portion, and we're looking at something that entered exponential growth really, really quickly. But when we look at the numbers being reported just around the world, you will see that they enter into, again, this exponential growth curve really quickly, but you also see some plateaus. Everybody has hit a plateau, and then once it plateaus, you have a plateau for about 3 to 5 days, and then it goes right back into this exponential curve. The importance of that is that those plateaus are some action being taken by the governing body saying stay at home or do this or do that to try and stop the spread, and it causes a plateau. But when you see this plateau, that means that they did it, it worked for a little while, but people didn't stick with it. And so they tried to go back to some type of normalcy in a couple of days, and the spread took right back off. Now, you also have to account for the time lag, because right now I think they're running like 7 to 8, even some people saying 10 days after being tested before they're getting results back. So I don't know if you've seen in the news that one of the top priorities has been creating a test where you can immediately get results. And I think right now the FDA just approved one where you can get results back in five minutes. And so that's going to be a game changer, because you can let people know right then, you got it, you need to stay here and go into isolation. So.
Wow, because I've heard some very startling numbers. Because I've heard numbers, and it might have even been like from the main doctor, Dr. Fauci, who's been doing a lot of the reports coming from the White House and everything, that has put that we're going to have astronomical amount of people in terms of percentages that will wind up having this disease. Not even thinking about the death toll, but just in terms of how many people will actually have it. I want to say that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't remember the exact number. I just remember when I heard it, I remember listening to myself, that's a whole lot of folks, because it might have been somewhere around 60 to 70% or something like that. When you've done the modeling, is that the kind of numbers that you're seeing?
Right now, they're anticipating somewhere between 3 to 5% of the population. We have 363 million in the United States. Run those numbers. It is not pretty. It ain't pretty by a long shot. But then, and so people, he said that we may lose around 100,000 people may die from this. This is one of those things where it's really difficult to talk about, because from a numbers standpoint, you try and give this information and not sound insensitive, because people are dying, people are sick, but when you're looking at those numbers in terms of how many people are going to get it, how many people are going to die from it, you're talking about somewhere around 1.1 to 1.5 million people getting the virus. We're doing, yeah.